Do you feel like you're losing yourself trying to save someone you love from substance abuse? You're not alone, and I can help. I'm Jason Coombs, and each week I go live to share powerful insights, frameworks, tips, and strategies that I've learned and that my parents earned the hard way so you don't have to. Trust me, there is hope for your addicted loved one and for you. Click the link in the show notes to join me live, and it won't cost you a dime. See you there.
Welcome to the Get Unhooked podcast with Jason Coombs, where experience meets insight. Jason Coombs, nationally recognized speaker, best-selling author, and founder of Brickhouse Recovery, shares hard-earned lessons on resilience, leadership, addiction, and mental health. No filters, no fluff, just real stories, practical wisdom, and a deeper look at what it takes to grow, lead, and keep moving forward. Now here's your host, Jason Coombs.
I'm grateful to be a man that is proud to wear a shirt that can sometimes be controversial, where I say, yeah, I'm recovered. People are like, you can't, you're not cured. And, what they don't understand is that it says, today I can be recovered. Today is the only day that we have. Yesterday was the celebration of my birth son's 19th birthday. Kind of a flashback. Those of you that have had the experience of thinking like, how is it that my child is an adult? And you go back in time and you're like, in some ways that feels like 3 lifetimes ago. And in other ways, it just blows my mind that it's been just shy of 2 decades that he was born and then my life changed. But it was cool. We had he's in another state, but we did a FaceTime, and my wife bought key lime pie and we had candles. And so my kids and then my wife got to sing happy birthday to him. And then, of course, my 10-year-olds blew out the candles for him and slobbered all over their pieces of pie. But it was like a surreal moment for me, as I was just thinking about the times that I never, ever thought that it would be like this. And the reality of the distance between what you hope for and what you're facing. And that distance was, it could have been a Grand Canyon. And that was like what I anticipated would always be the norm, was just like, this is always going to be this way, where I'm addicted, struggling, failing over and over, trying and then failing and then trying and failing. And my parents were on the same train, to now where it is such a completely different outcome. And it didn't take 19 years to get here. It took a lot less time than that, but it really was a reminder of like going back into that space of hope is such a vital gift that we receive. But in order to feel and to have hope, there are those 3 elements, and in the hope framework that I teach and talk about, just as a reminder, and then we'll get started on this particular week's assignments and check-ins and things. But the hope framework is, you gotta first be able to see what that summit is that you're trying to get to, where you can put the flag in and be like, okay, this is the goal. I achieved the goal. And a lot of us are clear about what we want, but the issue is that second piece is we can't see the path to it. So when Nathan was born, I had that profound experience where I made him promises, and I wrote him that letter. And in that letter, I told him that I would change my life for him, and that I would someday, I would love to meet him and share my side of why I made the decision and why we made the decision to place him for adoption. And because I wasn't sure if I would be able to see him, not because the adopted family was not interested in having a relationship. It was, the question mark was, will I be able to live up to this? And will I be allowed to see him? But when I got clear on where I wanted to arrive, which was I'm going to become a man that he could be proud of, that remained a fantasy because I couldn't see the path to that. that make sense? Like I could not see what is the vehicle that's going to get me to that thing. A lot of people say I want to become a multimillionaire while they're sitting at the bar stool, drinking and fantasizing about this is what I'm going to do. But they don't know how to do it and they don't know the vehicle to get there. And so it becomes fantasy rather than reality. And so in order to see the path to that goal, that takes mentors, that takes people that have been in your shoes that can guide. That also takes an admission of like, okay, I can't get there the same way that I've been trying. I may need to look at this different, and I may need to ask for some help, which is where the third piece comes in. And this is the one that is probably the most important when it comes to someone with substance use disorder. And it's probably the one that gets the least amount of attention. And that is self-efficacy, or one's confidence that they have what it takes to reach that goal and to follow through with the path that they can see before them. And so it's really important to get clear on, we'll call them mini summits, to get to the ultimate destination. And an example of that is we do little weekly, for the clients at Brickhouse Recovery, as they come in, the idea of staying sober long-term could be, deemed as like, okay, that's the summit that I'm going to go to. But the problem with that is not only is it not specific enough, the problem with that is they need little summits to succeed in. And so we set little milestones. For example, like the first is when they complete 1 week of 100% attendance, then they get some rewards. Like we'll give them hoodies and hats and gift cards and things like that. So like the first summit is 100% attendance for 5 days in a row, right? And it's not that we're taking their eye off the ball of the long-term sobriety goal. It's like, okay, what's something tangible? And then here's the path to get there. This is how to get there. And if you struggle, lean on your coach, lean on the program, lean on us, and we will help you get there. And then they get that victory. And now it's like, okay, now that we're here, we're going to set another target. And the next target is completing that first 30 days of that level of care that they started. And then they achieve that. There's this little ceremony, this little congratulatory, like we give them a gift because we want to like memorialize. That's why Alcoholics Anonymous works well, is when you get that 30-day chip. It's something tangible that memorializes what it means to arrive there. And so we give them a dog tag at that point. And then when they complete the other levels of care, we go through the same type of thing. So the idea is like continue to put these summits in front of them to the point where now we have a 365 club, where when you get 365 days sober, they join the 365 club. And there will be like a little patch that they could put either on, a jacket or they'll get a t-shirt that has the logo of 365 Club, and it becomes something that they're working towards. It might not seem like a big deal, but when you look at true change as identity change, then they see themselves as a member of this fellowship of the 365 Club. Like, okay, I'm going to go for that. Now, these are all tangible summits that are lofty. They're way out in the distance. The idea of staying sober 1 year when you're first getting sober is, you may as well say that you're going to raise you're going to raise a unicorn. It's like, it's just so intangible out there. At least it was for me. But it starts to become tangible when you can see that path. And that's a vital piece to this entire process. And that's another reason why it's important to not let our fears sway us to these instant solutions or cure all silver bullets that are available in Mexico, and treatment. People don't recover in treatment centers. People recover in relationships. And I spoke at the jail this week, and I sat down, and they were fully prepared for me to pitch them on treatment, because that's why I was invited to come, was to, as a community provider, to come tell them about the treatment options. And I said, look, I'm going to say something right out of the gate. People don't recover in treatment centers. People don't recover in institutions. We don't recover in buildings, but we recover in relationships. And you know what? The credibility that I had in that room went up significantly, because they were like, yeah, I've been to lots of treatment. I've been to a lot of institutions, and it's true. And so it's such an important piece for us to remember, that our role isn't to pigeonhole them into a solution that we think is going to be the silver bullet, but rather take a whole different approach. And that's what we do here, is as we get clearer on these mini summits, like you all came here with the hope that you're going to learn how to help your addicted loved one recover. And that is like the big goal, the big destination that you're hoping to achieve. But really, like, what does that even look like? Oh, I don't know. When they get 10 years sober? Well, I'll tell you right now, I have friends that relapsed at 14 years and their life fell apart. And I don't say that to discourage you, but I say that to reframe what it is we're actually trying to accomplish here. And so what we're trying to accomplish is, okay, let's set some mini summits that you can go accomplish. For example, the reframe of looking at your own personal experiment of quitting something that was not easy to quit, and make it that the summit, rather than focusing on your addicted loved one's life all the time and looking at, all right, my goal this week is to try to, self-mastery. I'm going to try to master something that has maybe been holding me back. And the byproduct of that is I'm going to come out of that with an understanding and an awareness of what my addicted loved one is going through on a micro scale level. And then that's powerful, because then we begin to look at everything that we do with fresh, new lenses. And that's what this masterclass is all about. That's what the Live Unhooked community is for, is to help you see a clearer destination of where you're trying to get in increments, and then be able to see that, okay, this community can be the vehicle. These resources can be the vehicle, not the destination, but the vehicle to get there. And if I don't think I can do it, like today, we're going to get into boundaries. If I don't think I can stand behind a boundary, or if I don't know how to set a boundary, or I've been wishy-washy in the past, like if there's one topic that I get asked about the most, it's about boundaries. And you can ask Stacy. I rarely will go into tactics on how to set boundaries, because there is a foundation that needs to be in place for boundaries to really be successful. And that's a lot of this pre-work that we're doing, is looking at the basis and the foundation of what the boundary is for, and what is a boundary in the first place. Because there are a lot of ways to look at what a boundary is, and we'll get into that. But that idea of doing the groundwork and putting you on this path in this vehicle is going to continue to help inspire you to feel self-efficacy, which is the third piece, so that you have the confidence and that you have the self-efficacy. There's not a real other word that describes what that feels like when you're like, I got this. Not alone, but I got this with this tribe. And I've got this with God. I've got this. I could do this, regardless of if my addicted loved one gets and stays sober, which is really empowering, because the harder we try to force that outcome that we want so much, the further out it gets. We actually manifest the very thing that we're trying to force, which is we push them away. It's like when my wife's comes up with the idea to take out the trash. It's like, I was going to do it, but now I don't really want to, even though I do it. But it's like when it's someone else's idea, it doesn't have the same impact than when it comes to them. So your addicted loved one, like as you learn how to help lead and guide, the desire to want to change will be evoked inside them, and boundaries are a part of it. Last week, as we sat with step 4, this is the fearless and searching moral inventory, looking at what's under there, with the vow of silence and the journaling. Some of you wrote things that you have never said out loud, and it brings tears. Might have brought up some anger for some of you, and maybe some of you felt nothing, and that's information too. So, I want to spend some time with that, because step 4 does not stay in the workbook. It comes home with you. It like whatever you wrote down, whatever came up for you last Saturday and throughout the week, it's been living in your body all week. So if you have experienced feeling exhausted, or if you've been a little more irritable, or if you felt increased guilt or shame, or struggle with impatience, or these are symptoms that manifest when you are going through the not only the process of looking deep within yourself and becoming aware of what's in that cave. The treasure is, but it's the cave that we feared to enter. But also looking at when you give up something, there is a grief and loss. So giving up scrolling, there is grief and loss in that. Giving up coffee, giving up caffeine, soda, there's grief and loss in that. It might appear to be sort of, I guess you could say, like a novelty, and like, oh, that's not real grief. Like I've lost people, that's grief. The point that I'm trying to make is anytime that you part from something that is what you turn to, there you go through the stages of grief and loss. And at another time we can go into what those stages mean, and they are, but the stages are anger, denial, in no particular order. I guess it would be in order. It would be denial, then anger, then bargaining, then depression, and acceptance. And so you go through all 5 of those, not in a linear way, but you go through them and vacillate through them. And so when you think about what you all walked through this week, think about what did you discover in your inventory that you did not expect to see, and what part of that process in step 4 was the hardest? What did you just want to skip? I know that the process works because it's, as we are willing to go in there and look at it, then it's, as a person in recovery, that's where the sunlight of the spirit exposes it, and then it can be healed, and it can be addressed, and it can be faced. But when it's buried in there and we walk around in denial, first and foremost, I don't want to rescue you from your aha or your breakthrough or the feelings that are uncomfortable, but recognize that we do the best that we can with what we have. And when we know better, we do better. And without that awareness, how could we really hold ourselves to that standard? It's like trying to hold my daughter accountable right now for what I would expect a 16-year-old to be able to do. And she's 10. It's okay to slobber our way through as we have these breakthroughs. And thank God we don't stop having breakthroughs. I mean, imagine if those stopped in our 30s and then the rest of our life, we just thought we knew it all and we never got to change or improve or have awareness of areas that we need additional healing. Like it's so cool that we live life in crescendo. And I hope that the day I die, I'm having like the biggest breakthrough where I'm like, oh my gosh, if I only would have known this in my 20s. My whole life could have, right? I just hope I never stop having those. So what a beautiful gift that is. And there's a beautiful Goldilocks zone between being an influencer with the external motivators and the boundaries, like you need to go get help or X, Y, or Z, and the relationship that is being built where it's also a part of their decision, where they're also like opting in. And so there can be, I guess, for the reason why I share this is that I don't want those of you who are like, well, then what do I do if I can't help them by nudging them to treatment? Like, then there's nothing I can do. There is it's two sides of the coin, and it's just finding that, like, as I said, like a Goldilocks zone between the two, where there's the external boundaries and the consequences that are natural. They're going to come by protecting yourself, but also building the empathy, which we're going to actually, this is a good seg into this conversation about boundaries. And then on the other side of that coin is, I'm trying to find words to describe it, which sometimes words will come through best with metaphors or stories. So if you think about someone with an addiction is like the wild stallion running out in the plains of Oregon or wherever, and these stallions aren't used to being controlled, and they're not used to being in fences. But then you go and you corral it, and you begin to, but you still give it room to run. Like to put it in a small corral is going to be very difficult for the horse to become trained or tame. And I don't want to act like I know anything about training horses, but I know enough to this metaphor can work. But if you are able to bring at least some fences and begin that process of the fences, and then move those fences in gradually, then that can influence them to find that Goldilocks zone, because you're still in a relationship when your loved one is within that corral, but you're not trying to control them to where you expect them to be trained and the horse is broken and that they're not wild at all any longer. And that's what you see in jail, like when people are out running wild with no job, no law, no responsibilities, no curfew, no accountability, and now they're confined to a small space and they have a schedule. They have to eat when their food is served. It's like they only have so many options, and then as soon as they get released, it's back to the wild. Like it doesn't work that way. And so you can adjust those fences as needed within the context of the relationship. So with that, let's jump into the next section here. So I want to briefly speak to step 5 in the 12 steps, because step 5 in our framework is, in the 12 steps, is we admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. And step 4 was the writing, and step 5 is the confession, I guess you would say, or the expression or the saying. And here's the truth that nobody wants to hear, is that secrets keep us sick. So in a sense, what you all just shared is a step 5 experience. You went through step 1, recognizing powerlessness and unmanageability. In step 2, it's admitting that there's a power greater than yourself, which could be whatever that means for you. For purposes of this assignment, it would be like, okay, I'm going to try this out and make a decision to give it a whirl, and then I'm going to answer these questions in the step 4 worksheet. And through that process, you basically admitted, I can't there's a power that can, and I'm going to let him. And that is where we all now start to see that these secrets and these parts of ourselves that we haven't looked at get to see the light of day. And the thing that you've not said out loud is the thing that has had the most power over you. And the moment you put those words to it, and another set of ears hears it, the weight of it changes. Not all the way, but enough to feel. But I do want to give a loving suggestion for those that want to go through this process and experience it, is to find one person, a safe person, or maybe it's a sponsor or a counselor or a clergy member, a trusted friend, and tell them what you wrote in your step 4 workbook, and just share the whole thing. Tell them you're not looking for advice. You're not looking for feedback. You just want to express it to someone, and you need a safe place to do it. This isn't a confession in a religious sense, okay? Although it can be, if you so choose. This is exposure therapy, which heals layers of shame, okay? And now, speaking about the personal experiment, reflection, the step 5 is something that you do this week between, maybe you could do it between now and Wednesday. But I also want you to pick one experiment, one small thing that you will do differently this week. And maybe it's continuing your momentum on what you chose to give up, and take an inventory of that. Was it realistic? Was it doable? Is there a smaller summit that you can go after, and try to adjust so that you don't have to live in shame. Like, I'm never going to accomplish this, like the giving up scrolling, for example, that to me, that's like giving up anything that has sugar in it. It's like, where do I draw that line? Because everything has some form of sugar. Like, does that mean I have to give up eating bananas? Like, where's that line? But maybe I could set it at, I'm going to not have desserts after meals. Like, that's something more manageable. Like, when I feel that craving, when I need that hit after I have something to eat, my go-to is to have something sweet. I'm going to put a piece of gum in instead. So you start to bite size what that looks like for you. So identify one thing that you're going to work on this week. Maybe it is, I will not loan my addicted loved one money this week. Maybe it's, I will not ask her where she was last night. Maybe it's, I will go to an Al-Anon meeting, or I'm going to attend an additional Serenity Circle meeting this week. Maybe it's, I will not answer the phone after a certain hour, or respond to their texts after a certain hour. Pick one, write it down, and let's check on it next week. Okay. So I want to take 60 seconds, and we'll do a vow of silence for you to write that down. What comes to you that you're going to set as your experiment this week. In effort to also introduce step 6 is we were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. So the question is, all right, now I've gone into the cave. I've brought all this stuff to light. Now what the heck do I do with it? Like, if I keep looking at it and nothing changes, I'm going to stuff it right back in the cave because it's difficult for me to have it here and do nothing with it. So it's easier to tuck away. And that's what most people do. Is as soon as something like a memory comes up, it's like, I'm not looking at that. We'll let bygone be bygones. But notice the language in step 6. It says, we were entirely ready, not kind of ready, not ready to talk about being ready, but entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. Step 4, you became familiar with the patterns. And in step 5, you'll express that out loud. And in step 6, you've actually decided that you want them to be removed, root and branch. And that's where, I think a lot of people will stall out and not resume working through the steps. And of course, this is all introductory. I don't expect you all to have deep dove into all of the steps up to this point right now, but I would be remiss if I didn't introduce the process to the steps and how it relates to the work that we're doing here. Now, here's the secret. Most of our defects are also our strategy. So if our defect is control, the control is keeping me safe. The rescuing makes me feel needed. The worry feels like love. And if God takes those away, or if I offer that up, what do I have left? And that is the real question of step 6. Are you actually ready to live without the thing that has been protecting you, even if it also has been holding you back? And this is a daily process. This is a habit builder, because there's no way we're going to be able to be entirely ready to have God remove all our defects of character. That's why the word these is really important. These means have him remove these defects, which are the ones that are the most glaring, the ones that we have recognized are weeds in our garden that are choking out our flowers or our crops. Okay. So I want to tell you about the day that my dad held a boundary that I will never forget. I was deep in addiction and desperate for money. And I went to my parents' house and the doors were locked. And they had installed a security system after I stole from them. And I went around back and I knocked on the bedroom window. And my dad opened the back door and stood there. And he just stood there and looked at me. And I launched into my story, with tears in my eyes, shaky voice. And it went something like this. Dad, I owe my dealer $100. And if I don't get him the money, then he's going to kill me. And my dad just looked at me and he said, I do not believe you. You'll never see another dime out of your mother or me. And I begged and I said, but Dad, they're going to kill me. And you know what he said? He said, Jason, I hope they don't hurt you too badly. And then he closed the door. And for years, I held that moment against him. For years, I thought it was the cruelest thing that my dad ever did to me, even though it was a lie that I was trying to get him to buy into. And today, I think it might be the most loving thing he ever did, because it was after that my problem was finally my problem, and solving my own problems is the front door of recovery. So this next section, I'm gonna give you the framework I wish someone had handed me 20 years ago. The framework that I have watched save marriages, save sons and daughters, and save mothers. It's called the boundary framework. 8 letters, 8 moves, and we're going to go through every one. So before I give you the framework, I have to undo something first. Most of you have been told that you got to set boundaries. Maybe the therapist told you that, or friends have told you that, or books, including mine, and it's not worked. At least not the way you wanted it to. And here's why. His boundaries are not what most people think they are. A boundary is not a rule you give to someone else. A boundary is not a threat. A boundary is not just a fence you build around them. A boundary is what you do when they do what they do. Okay. A boundary is what you do when they do what they do. So think about that again. It is your move. It's yours to enforce. It's yours to keep. They do not get a vote. And once you understand that, this whole thing starts to make sense. Now, here's the second reframe. And this one might be the most important thing I say in this whole session. Most people think a boundary is a wall to keep someone out, and that is wrong. A boundary is the only way you will ever truly love your addicted loved one without losing yourself. In fact, Brene Brown teaches this. She says, the most compassionate people are the most boundaried people. Empathy minus boundaries is not empathy. Compassion minus boundaries is not compassion. And I say it like this. Strong fences make great neighbors. And great neighbors make healthy coexistence. If you do not have a fence between you and your loved one's addiction, their chaos becomes your chaos. Their crisis becomes your crisis. They're on probation, and then you end up being on probation, and you never committed the crime. That's not love. That's enmeshment. And you can't influence anyone towards recovery from inside that enmeshment. You can only influence from a place of clarity, compassion, and steadiness. So the fence is what makes the compassion sustainable. Okay. 3 lines I want you to memorize before we go any further. The first is, you did not cause this. Second, you cannot cure it. Third, you cannot control it. But remember that you can contribute to it, or you can contribute to recovery. And the way you contribute starts with your approach and your boundaries. So one more thing before we get to the 8 letters is, remember the oxygen mask first, okay? If the cabin loses pressure, secure your own mask before assisting others. And there's a reason they say it that way. So you coming first is not selfish. It's the only way the rest of this works. Okay. So let's start with B, the letter B. So B is to be clear about what you can and can't control. Okay. This is the foundation. And before you set any boundary, before you say any word, you have to answer one question. And that is, what is mine and what is theirs? So you cannot control whether he or she stays sober. And you can't control whether they keep their job, or whether they call their sponsor, or whether they go into treatment, or whether they invest in the process of their therapy. None of those are yours. What you can control is you, and what you say, what you do, where you go, what you allow in the home, what you give, what you withhold. Those are the things that you can control. Now, my mom, in the first few years of my addiction, she was a fixer, always has been. And when I came home and said, I'm addicted to drugs, her first instinct was, no, you're not addicted, Jason. You're not an addict. And it was like, we can fix this. And in her own chapter, in the back of Unhooked, in the appendix, she writes about what she did. Yeah, she talks about taking over my finances, and she found me a used car when I totaled mine. She hired me an attorney. She made me a to-do list. And she, in her own words, said we were in a full court press on Jason and his life. And none of it worked because she was trying to control the wrong things. See, she was trying to control whether I got sober, whether I could make good decisions, all the things that were not hers to control. And she said that I had learned not only was I powerless over this disease, but my son was powerless as well. There was a higher power that could restore my son and me to sanity. The challenge was to get out of the way and let him get out of the way. That is the move. Be clear about what you can control, which is you and which is not you, which is yours, which is not yours, and let go of everything else. If you struggle with this, I point you to the 7 steps to surrender framework, because that's also step 1 in the 7 steps to surrender, is write down what you can and can't control. And I have to go back to this over and over and over in this work that I do with the addicted population, because sometimes it gets blurry and I need to remind myself by just writing it out. Okay. Now the O is to outline the boundary in writing. This is very helpful because if you are getting used to talking about boundaries, it's difficult to remember which ones are actual boundaries and which ones are just preferences that sound like boundaries. So getting clear on what your boundaries are, what is and is not okay with you, and writing them down is really important, because verbal boundaries fail every time. Because when the moment comes and your loved one is standing at the door crying or yelling or begging, your brain will go offline and you'll begin to bargain and you'll begin to argue with yourself and you will fold. And that's miserable anyway, because your heart is going to be feeling something and your fear is going to be playing in. And then your knowledge base is be like, oh my gosh, like I've learned all this, and they're all arguing with each other. But if you've already made a decision ahead of time, like this is my boundary, then it's just automatic. So writing it down is the move, not just in your head, but on paper, in ink, and be specific and be clear so that it's enforceable. And that will make you put your boundaries through a filter. Like which ones are the line? An example is in a marriage, a boundary is, I will be faithful to you. You will be faithful to me. If either of us break that boundary, then this relationship is over. Like that is an example of like what a clear boundary is. Okay. And here is what I want you to do that most people do not, is if you are establishing a boundary that is more of an agreement. For example, okay, you want to live here? I will allow you to live in my home, but these are the conditions. And then you write out the conditions and you both sign it. So what we do when someone signs up for treatment, they make an agreement on the front end, which is they will abstain from drugs and alcohol. They will attend their groups, and there's a lot of expectations when they come into a program. And we recognize that it's very much like the bowling alley where there's guardrails along the gutters, like the bumpers. When my kids bowl, they bounce their ball off the bumpers, and those are the guardrails that are the boundaries. But we also recognize that when someone is in treatment, then we need to give them room, just like the Mustang, that we need to give them room to be able to cross and bump up against the boundaries so that there can be a correction. Like the guardrails are important enough that they need to bump up against them in order to redirect and correct. So if they're wishy-washy, then there's no like correction. There's no, bouncing the ball back to the middle, but then it's going to overshoot the middle and go to the other side. And that's where the other boundary is in place, right? So if this becomes an agreement, then you want to have them both sign it. So what we'll do is if they they resume use and we've had a verbal conversation, we remind them of their agreement that they made upon entry to the program, and they continue to use, or it might be that they continue to miss groups or show up late or not do their assignments, whatever that is, then we'll get to a little bit more in one of these next steps of the boundary framework, but we will renegotiate the fences and we'll get clear again and have them re-sign the new agreement. And it's a negotiation, but there are firm, solid like lines that are drawn, like, okay, these are the gutters and these are the guardrails. And within that, we can negotiate and come up with an agreement. So I know that sounds formal to like outline it and write it down, even to the point where both of you sign it and date it and memorialize it. But it needs to be, because as I mentioned, strong fences make great neighbors. And in active addiction and in early sobriety, memory bends and it gets blurry, and promises get rewritten in real time, which makes it very tricky. The sign boundary protects both people from, oh, I never said that, or you never told me. It's an act of love because it removes the ambiguity. And in Unhooked, I include a boundary agreement chart, which is just a few examples. And it's one of the more practical tools in the book. And it is what my parents eventually put together when I was living under their roof in early recovery. And it's also some that were real life examples of people that I was working with at the time. So it's not a full comprehensive list, but here's what was on it. The agreement is like, okay, if you're going to live here in my home, then I'm committed that my home is going to be safe. And so when my cousin came and detoxed at my house, and she was 5 months pregnant and strung out on heroin, part of the agreement was, okay, if you're going to live here, I need to know, and I need peace of mind knowing that you are clean and sober. And so the agreement is, I will allow you to live here, but I also am going to require that upon request you provide a alcohol and drug test. And you can buy those at Walgreens or wherever and just have them on hand. The idea isn't to catch them and become their investigator or private investigator. It's not about that at all. It's about, we're going to make this agreement so that in the event she comes home gorked and she's loaded and I'm like, are you high? And she's like, no, I'm not. And say, okay, now's where we take that drug test. I'm not taking a drug test. Well, if we didn't have that written down and understood on the front end, then it's going to get into an argument. But if it's already agreed upon, it's like the condition of you living here is that you will submit to a drug test. So you are either choosing to live here or you're choosing to leave. Your choice. So it's not me kicking her out. It's me reminding her of the agreement that we came up with before we landed ourselves in that situation. Okay. So that like, you got to be clean and sober if you're living here. A couple of other things that we put in place, and these are the fences within the guardrails that can be customized, like a curfew, for example, must complete the chores. So I don't want my home to be a flop house. You're not just going to sit around watching the Kardashians all day. Like, there's going to be some things that I want you to do to contribute, like emptying the dishwasher, for example, keeping your room clean. It might be paying rent when it's appropriate, respecting the house rules, and being active in a recovery plan. So those are just some examples of what the boundary is. And then on the consequence side, like, in the event that those boundaries are crossed, then it will lead up to reduced privileges. If it's illegal behavior, it might end up with, the police being called. And all of that is talked about on the front end, especially if they're using on the property. Like, I want them to know that in the event this plays out this way, this is what will happen. And when you recognize that, like, what's not on the chart are the feelings, the explanations, the promises, all of those things get muddy and murky if they're not talked about on the front end. So think of it as like getting into a business relationship with someone. You don't just launch into a business without having an operating agreement. And the operating agreement isn't what you go to every single day and you're like reading it and reminding each other of the operating agreement. No, the operating agreement's just what's in place on the front end. In the event something down the road happens to where there's confusion and ambiguity, then you go back to the operating agreement so that you're like, I think we got this spelled out. Let's go to that we both signed, and that will be like what we do. And that's the idea. So for parents that have adult children in the home, this is the conversation that you need to have, is like, before you meet with your adult child, sit down with your spouse or your partner and write it out together first, which is like, okay, what is okay with us and what is not okay with us? And then have that conversation with your addicted loved one and then you come up with an agreement, because some of it might be negotiable. Like, whether it's important to have a 10 o'clock curfew or a midnight curfew, like whatever that is that you and your, like the rules of your home, that's going to look different. When family members ask me, should I do this or should I not do this when it comes to a boundary? It's always tricky for me to say, yes, you should, or no, you shouldn't, because what it comes down to is like, well, what are you okay with? Some families are totally okay with the chaos that comes with having someone who's an adult child living in their home, who's playing video games all day in the basement, not having a job, not contributing. And they're okay with that. And they're okay with them using in the basement. What they're not okay with is them out driving around loaded at risk of killing someone else behind the wheel. Like, so that's their boundary. So it depends on the family. It depends on your preference, depends on the person. So it's important to like get clear, like what, rather than like what, asking what does Jason think about this boundary? Think, what am I okay with? And what am I not okay with? And you might ask yourself, what is robbing me of my dreams, my travel? Like, am I not going on vacations because I have this adult child living with me? Like, am I going backwards to where I feel like I'm raising an adult child? And am I teaching them learned helplessness? Or do I have a good boundary in place and a structure in place to where like we're building trust and we're able to coexist because we've got strong fences in place? Okay. Of course, whether they're using at the time or whether they're in early sobriety at the time, that is going to look different. So your operating agreement or your boundaries that you set when they were in active addiction versus early sobriety is going to look different. And it should. And that's the point, is like revisiting what is and what isn't okay with you, depending on where they're currently at. And so it doesn't have to be so blurry to where nothing's written down and it's just verbal all the time. And it's like these moving goalposts and you don't know where the actual boundary is. And it's not so rigid where you just write one set of boundaries and then fast forward and now they're in early sobriety and you're like, but we already agreed, like we are not going to help out financially. But now they're in treatment, and because they're in treatment, they can't go get gainful employment because their priority has changed. And now they're doing group and they're investing in their sober community. And so you might change that boundary, like then no, I'm not helping you financially, to, you know what, I'm going to support this lifestyle because there's momentum here and I want to contribute the right way to continuing the momentum. So if I can help with the bills while they're in early sobriety, while they're committed to their program, I'm going to do that, which is what my parents did. I also know family members that are like, no, I can't. Like, I can't afford it, so I'm not going to do it. But maybe there are other things that I could do. Maybe I can give them rides to group. Maybe I can, help them fill up their gas tank. Like, there are things that you might be able to still do without giving them cash, for example, which I don't think giving cash is ever a real good idea. Although when they're in early sobriety, that might look different because giving them cash might be the very thing that helps them grow and become strong. So let's move on to the U, okay? Using natural consequences, not punishment. A lot of times boundaries are weaponized, okay? There's a difference, and a big one. If you don't understand it, your boundaries will feel like attacks and your loved one will fight you every step of the way. A natural consequence is what the world does when your loved one makes a bad choice or breaks a boundary. For example, if he doesn't pay his rent, he gets evicted. If he drives drunk, he gets arrested. If he steals something, he loses trust. Those are natural consequences, and they belong to him or to her, and they're his to feel. Now, punishment is punitive. Punishment is what you add on top of that to make sure that he feels bad enough. It's the lecture, or the silent scorn, it's the I told you so, it's the the withdrawal of love. That's punishment. And punishment doesn't produce change. Punishment produces shame, and shame produces more using. So if you go back to that example where if, okay, you agreed to submit to a drug test. If you're going to live here, you are not willing to provide a drug test, then you're choosing not to live here. So I always put it back on them. Like, you are choosing to either stay with the agreement or to break the agreement. Same thing if they come into treatment. Like, they agreed to a certain set of expectations or norms. We don't kick people out of treatment. We hold them accountable to the agreement that we made together. And so if they opt out of that agreement and they break the rules over and over, and we bring those fences in and they still are not cooperating, then we really don't have an agreement, and they're opting out of the program. And I always reframe it that way. I was like, hey, look, I'm not kicking you out. You opted out when you broke the agreement. You opted out because I'm still in this if you were also in this with me, but you opted out, so we're not in this. You see the difference? Because here's the principle underneath the letter U is that we change at the speed of pain. And you can write that down. We change at the speed of pain. And that's how it works. And that's how it worked for me. I did not change because someone gave me a great speech. I changed when the pain of staying the same got bigger than the pain of changing. And natural consequences allow that natural change process to occur. So boundaries are vital because it's not just about keeping them out, and it's not about keeping you in. It's the separation between two individuals so that there can be natural consequences, so that the bowling ball can still go down the lane and find its way, but has something to bump up against in order to, so plan on them being guardrails, plan on them bumping up against it or pushing the envelope or crossing the line, just plan on that. And then you don't feel wronged or manipulated when that friction happens, when it bounces off the guardrail. You're expecting it. And that way you don't have to enforce a punishment if they bounce up against it. You're just reminding them of what is and what isn't okay. So every time you stand between your loved one and their consequence, then you stall the change process, because that's not loving them. That's blocking them and denying them the very pain that they need. That's trying to wake them up, and that will evoke internal motivation. So now I'm not telling you to go inflict pain on your loved one, because that is punishment. I'm telling you to just stop blocking the pain that's already coming, because there is a massive difference. The punishment says, I'm cutting you off because you don't deserve this perk or this help. And natural consequences say, look, I love you too much to keep standing in the way of what might wake you up. And so go back to my dad at the back door. He didn't yell at me and he didn't lecture me. He didn't tell me I was a disappointment. He didn't withhold his love, although he was angry. He let the natural consequence be mine. If I owed someone money, had that been true, that was my problem to solve, not his. And the world is a better teacher than you are. So just get out of the way and let it teach. So many of the people that I treat have learned helplessness because their families have done so much for them that they've actually done them in. Okay. So N is never rescue from consequences. This is as I've mentioned, this is probably the hardest of the framework, because it's the one that separates families who change from the families. It's the difference between the families that keep spinning and the families who change. Because the brain of the addicted person is not motivated by your love and your tears or your speeches or your concern, because the brain of the addicted person is motivated by one thing, and that's pain, because pain is the great motivator. It always has been. People move and take action for two reasons. Either we are moving away from pain or we are moving towards pleasure. So every time you rescue your loved one from a consequence, you're not loving them. You're stealing the only thing that has a chance of changing them. Now, I know how that sounds, and bear with me, because I'm going to tell you a story that I have about my mom. When I was deep in active addiction, on probation, in and out of jail, my parents got me a small apartment so that I would not be on the street. And my mom would come and she would drop something by early in the morning before I was awake or if I was gone, and she would leave a little care package on the porch. Sometimes it was chips and salsa. Sometimes it was milk or bread. Sometimes it was fresh socks or underwear that she would buy at Costco. And inside every care package, there was a little note. And in her beautiful handwriting, it always said the same thing. She would say, "I love you, son. Love, Mom." She loved me twice in every note. And in the book, I wrote this exact line. And I want you to feel the weight of it. She loved me so much, she often loved me right out of my pain and consequences. Yes, I would have gone hungry without those care packages. Yes, I would have been homeless without that apartment. And yes, I would have hit rock bottom much faster. And my mother's love kept me alive. And my mother's love also kept me sick at times. So both things were true. And when she finally stopped, and she finally let me feel the consequences I had been earning for years, that's when I started to change. Not because she stopped loving me, though. She never stopped loving me, but because she stopped rescuing me from what I had earned. Now, I want to be clear, those care packages weren't what was keeping me sick or denying me of pain. It was all of the other stuff above and beyond that. It was paying the rent. It was providing the cash. It was being susceptible to her fear response because I knew how to manipulate that. I knew how to get what I wanted. So mothers that are listening, hear me, that the note in the care package is a beautiful thing. But just make sure it doesn't go so far that it keeps your loved ones sick. Okay. Now, the D is do what you'll say you will do. And here's the hard truth. Your addicted loved one does not believe you. Not yet, at least. Because they've heard you set boundaries, and maybe you've said the same thing 20 times, maybe 50 times, and they've watched you fold. And so when you announce a new boundary, they hear noise and they will wait you out, and they know if they push hard enough, long enough, then you might cave because in the past you have. Now, that might not be true for all of you, of course, making sweeping statements without knowing your specific situation or scenario. But the point is valid, and maybe that's what you need to hear today. So it's looking at the areas that we can improve, because the boundary is not the words. The boundary is the follow through. The first time you do what you say you will do, the boundary becomes real. So when you do what you say you will do, that's also going to be a very hard day because they're going to push back. They're going to test you. They're going to gaslight. They're going to make you the bad guy, but do it anyway, because that's the day the boundary is actually a boundary. My ex-wife, we'll call her Kelly. That's a pseudonym. I'd been lying to her for years, like stealing money from her. I pawned her heirlooms. I even pawned her wedding ring. I would take money out of her purse. I would disappear for nights at a time. And she had threatened to leave before, but every time I talked her out of it until the night that she didn't fold. And I came home and she was waiting for me, and she had asked about the money that went missing. And I went into my usual routine of defending and blaming and trying to flip the conversation by gaslighting. And in the middle of all that noise, she looked at me and, in the book, I described her face this way, but there was still love in her eyes. And there was something that I had never seen before. And it was a hint of steel. And she said gently 4 words, "I want a divorce, Jason." And I lost my mind. I cried. I begged. I made promises. I got angry. I flipped it on her. And, her voice never changed. It stayed gentle and it stayed steady. And she just kept saying, "I can't do this anymore." And that night I left. She had said it and meant it. And for the first time in our marriage, she did what she said she would do. And that follow through changed everything. And a small boundary you keep beats a boundary that you fold on, even if it's a big boundary. So hear that again. Like a small boundary you keep beats a big boundary that you fold on every time. The A is to adjust the fences as needed. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, because here's what nobody tells you is that the boundaries are not one and done. Boundaries are living, breathing, and they adjust, but they adjust with purpose. They're not just moving goalposts or targets that leave everybody confused. The first version of the boundary, that's going to get tested. And when it does, don't abandon the boundary. Just, either raise the fence a little higher or bring it in a little bit more. Or if it's too rigid, loosen it a little bit more. Like it's got to be, it's a relationship. Think of it as a dance. Like it's a dance, but all the while you've got your oxygen mask on, you're off the beach, you've got your emotional raincoat on, and you're able to make progress in the relationship with both parties staying safe, but also a working development of trust and rapport, which is the other purpose of a boundary. And, I watched this progression that of my parents. The first one is version 1, it said, "Do not steal from us." And that worked for a few months. And then I broke into my dad's medical office and I stole cash and syringes. And I stole my mom's jewelry and I stole my dad's rare coin collection out of their house. Version 2 is, "You can come over, but only when we are home." And that worked for a little while until I started showing up unannounced. Or version 3, they installed a security system. They put in an alarm. They changed the locks. And then version 4, eventually, my dad standing at the back door saying, "You'll never see another dime out of your mother and me." Each version was a response to what I had shown them, and they adjusted. They were not stuck. They were learning and adjusting. And catch this, they were not adjusting because their hearts were getting harder. They were adjusting because their love was getting wiser and the disease was trying to manipulate. And so they got wiser in how to navigate it. So hard love is not hard-heartedness. Hard love is wisdom. It's heart wisdom that's finally figured out what works. Now the R is to respond calmly, not emotionally. And when you enforce a boundary, your loved one is going to come at you. As I mentioned, it might be tears, anger, manipulation, gaslighting, guilt, threats, the whole arsenal. And you have a choice. You can either lock horns with them or you can just stay calm. And calm doesn't mean that you are cold. It's calm is the quality in your voice that says, "I have decided and I love you," but the answer is still no. Okay. This is where the emotional raincoat comes in. Now, Y is the final letter in the boundary framework. You come first. It's a reminder that if I could only teach one of these 8 letters, I might just teach you this one. You come first, not because you matter more than them, not because you come first because they're in their sickness. It's you come first because you are drowning and you can't save someone else while you are drowning. So my friend Becky, Her story is in Unhooked. Becky's son was deep in addiction, and she had spent years rescuing him, years of bills, lawyers, attempts, programs, and despair. And one day she made a decision. She loaded him in the car. She drove him to a homeless shelter in the city, and she got out of the car with him, walked him to the door, and she gave him a hug, and she pointed him towards the door of the shelter. And she said, I dropped my son off at a homeless shelter, gave him a hug goodbye, and pointed him towards the door. At least I knew I left him where help and a hot meal could be found. And today her son is sober and he has his life back, and she has him back. And that's what it took, because for years she'd been saving him at the cost of herself. Okay. So that is the boundary framework. As we look at this week and the assignments this week, is that you are going to write a resignation letter, because you've been working a job that nobody has asked you to apply for. And that's the rescuer, the fixer, the emotional thermostat. And today you get to resign and you get to write yourself a new job description. So the letter of resignation is where you go through part one, and then part two is writing your new job description. And this might sound trite. This might sound a little maybe fluffy, but if you lean into this, asking yourself what you are actually responsible for in your new job description, your new identity, and what you are not responsible for, you'll get clear on what a good day looks like in your new role. And that's going to be a powerful experience as you go into the vow of silence and writing that out. Okay. So this week's homework is to share one piece of your inventory with a person that's safe, whether it's a sponsor, therapist, or a trusted friend, and enforce your boundary at least once. Notice what happens in your body when you hold it, and write your reflection down. And then I want you to reread your resignation letter every morning this week and read the new job description, not the old one, but the new job description. Okay. And then track one rescue urge. So those are the assignments for this week. Hey, thanks for your time and attention today. Look, if this message gave you hope or clarity, hit all the 5 stars, subscribe, and share buttons to help the algorithms spread this message to more people in need. And don't forget, I go live every single week to share insights, frameworks, and real answers to your questions in real time. And you can join me for free. The link to register is in the show notes. You'll also find some info and treatment options and discounts to powerful resources like Warrior Heart Bootcamp for Men and Heart of a Woman Retreats for Ladies and Brickhouse Recovery in the show notes. You are not alone. There is hope, and I'm here to help you get unhooked.